The cornfields along County Road 47 looked almost endless that afternoon, rippling under a bruised October sky like something restless was moving beneath them. It was 4:47 p.m. on October 19, 2007, when Hannah Cole, a quiet 14-year-old with sandy blonde hair pulled into a ponytail, stepped down from the yellow school bus at the corner of County Road 47 and Briarwood Drive in rural Redwood County, Ohio. Redwood was the kind of place where neighbors waved from tractor cabs and people left their keys on the kitchen counter without thinking twice. The air that day smelled of cut fields and faraway wood smoke, middle of autumn in full swing. Hannah adjusted the strap of her backpack and gave the driver, Jerry Halbrook, a little wave. "Have a good weekend, kiddo," he called after her, voice warm but tired from a long week on the route. "You too, Mr. Halbrook. See you Monday," she said. Her voice was light, easy. Nothing in it hinted at fear or urgency. Jerry watched her walk off, small figure in a denim jacket, jeans, and sneakers, before shifting the bus into gear. He had 6 stops left, and didn't think twice. But later, he would replay that moment over and over, haunted by how normal it had all looked. Hannah started the short, familiar walk home. Just a quarter mile. She'd walked it hundreds of times. That road was as ordinary as a calendar page. Open farmland on all sides, sightlines stretching far enough to see a truck approach from half a mile away. But sometime between 4:47 p.m. and 4:59 p.m. on that wide-open stretch of road, Hannah Cole vanished. No neighbors saw anything. No passing cars slowed or stopped. Even Scout, the Cole family's border collie who waited on the porch most afternoons, never caught sight of her. By the time Jerry's bus rounded the next hill, she was already gone. The October sun hung low, nearly horizontal, casting long shadows that stretched across gravel like dark fingers. Hannah's backpack would be found 3 days later, drenched with ditch water, empty except for ruined textbooks. Her phone, a simple flip phone her parents gave her for emergencies, pinged its last tower at 4:52 p.m. Then, nothing. The only thing anyone could offer was an offhand comment from Margaret Callahan, who lived on the dairy farm up the road. She mentioned seeing a faded blue work van creeping along County Road 47 that afternoon. Something about the way it moved slow, like the driver wasn't sure where they were going. People at the time brushed it off. They wouldn't brush it off for long. Before we go deeper, if you're watching from somewhere across the country or across the world, let us know where you're tuning in from. Stories like this echo differently depending on where you stand. Redwood County had a population of just over 9,000. No big box stores, no late-night traffic. High school football nights were practically holidays, and crime usually meant someone's kid tipped a cow or spray-painted a silo. Redwood family had lived there for generations. Mark, Hannah's father, managed the local grain cooperative. Laura, her mother, worked part-time at the Redwood County Library. Ethan, 11 at the time, was the younger brother who thought Hannah knew everything. Hannah wasn't a kid who made trouble. She was thoughtful, conscientious, played clarinet in the Redwood Middle School band, volunteered at the county animal shelter on weekends. Teachers said she was one of the quiet good ones, the kind of kid who kept the world gentle. That Friday, October 19th, she attended her regular classes, ate lunch with her best friend Megan Wilcox, and boarded bus number 14 at 4:35 p.m. Nothing about her day was unusual. She stepped off the bus, she started walking home, and then she vanished. At 5 p.m., Laura glanced at the kitchen clock and felt the first small tug of concern. Hannah was always home by 5, always. It was like the house was wired to her footsteps. At 5:10, she tried her phone, straight to voicemail. By 5:20, she stepped out on the porch, scanning the road for signs of her daughter. Scout paced at her feet, whining, tail twitching with unease. By 5:30, she was standing in the driveway, arms wrapped tight around herself. When Mark came in from the barn at 5:45, he found her like that. "She's not home," Laura said. Her voice was thin, stretched tight around rising panic. "She's never this late. She isn't answering." Mark didn't say anything at first. He just grabbed his truck keys and headed for the road. He drove County Road 47 twice, then Briarwood Drive, calling Hannah's name out the open window. Nothing but empty fields and the sound of wind in the stalks. He drove past the Callahan farm, past the Henderson property, past the long stretch of road where he could see nearly all the way to the bus stop. She was nowhere. At 6:15 p.m., they called the Redwood County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Aaron Blake took the call. When she heard the age, 14, her tone shifted instantly. "We're sending someone immediately," she said. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up to the Cole farmhouse, blue and red lights cutting through the dusk like a warning. Officers fanned out with flashlights, neighbors joining in. Voices called Hannah's name across the fields, swallowed by the growing dark. At 8 p.m., Sheriff Daniel Harper arrived. Stocky, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for being steady under pressure. He questioned Laura and Mark gently but directly. "Any trouble at school? Anyone new in her life? Something she mentioned recently?" "No," Laura kept saying. "No. She was fine. She was happy. She'd never run away." Harper listened, jaw tight. He had seen runaway cases. This wasn't one of them. By midnight, more than 50 volunteers were combing cornfields, barns, creek beds, and ditches. People who had known Hannah since she was a toddler walked in long lines with flashlights, shouting her name into the blackness. The temperature dropped below 40. Laura refused to go inside. Mark stood beside the sheriff, staring at the huge county map spread across the hood of a patrol car. Somewhere out in that darkness, beyond the reach of flashlights and human hope, Hannah Cole had been taken, and Redwood County, quiet, peaceful, predictable, was about to face a kind of fear it had never known. Dawn broke over Redwood County with a pale, colorless light that made everything look washed out and indifferent, as if the world itself hadn't noticed Hannah was gone. By 6 a.m. on Saturday, October 20th, the Cole farmhouse no longer resembled a family home. Now it looked like the makeshift command center of a crisis no one had been prepared for. Sheriff Harper stood in the kitchen surrounded by maps, folders, and deputies. He hadn't slept. Neither had Deputy Blake. Both drank black coffee like it was medicine, bracing themselves for whatever would come next. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation had been alerted overnight. They promised specialists by mid-morning. Everyone knew the same grim truth. The first 48 hours were everything. After that, statistics turned brutal. At the table, Laura Cole sat clutching Hannah's school photo. Hannah smiling in a blue sweater, a quiet confidence in her eyes. Laura's fingers traced the edges like they could protect her daughter through the glossy paper. "You'll find her," she whispered once to Harper, voice raw. "Please, you'll find her." Harper didn't lie. "We're doing everything we can." Across the room, Mark Cole paced like he couldn't stop moving or he'd collapse. Their son Ethan, 11 years old and terrified, stayed upstairs. He didn't know whether to hope or fear, and he was too young for either burden. At 7:23 a.m., a knock rattled the screen door. Deputy Blake held a mud-spattered evidence bag. Inside was something unmistakable: Hannah's backpack. A farmer named Earl McAllister had found it while checking irrigation along the drainage ditch beside State Route 41, about 2 miles northeast of the bus stop, completely the wrong direction from Hannah's walk home. It was soaked, heavy with ditch water, the zipper half open as if someone tugged it in a hurry. Deputy Blake set it gently on the dining table. Laura let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream but wasn't human either. Mark caught her before she collapsed. Inside the bag, investigators found waterlogged textbooks, a crushed granola bar, a cartoon cat pencil pouch. What they didn't find was Hannah's phone, or her little canvas wallet, or anything that explained why the backpack had been dumped like trash in a ditch miles away. Sheriff Harper spread a county map across the table. He placed a red dot at the bus stop, another at the ditch where the backpack was found. "That's 2 miles in the opposite direction," he said, voice low. Someone moved her. And with that, the air shifted. This wasn't a disappearance. This was an abduction. By mid-morning, K-9 units arrived from Columbus, German shepherds trained in tracking human scent. The handlers started at the bus stop. Dogs sniffed Hannah's jacket, then went to work, noses low, moving in tight patterns. For 40 yards, they tracked her scent south along County Road 47. Then, nothing. The dog circled, sniffed, whined, confused. "Scent ends in the road," one handler said. "Usually means a vehicle." Deputy Blake looked at Harper, expression tightening. Whoever grabbed her didn't waste a second. The investigation expanded in every direction. Deputies went door to door within 5 miles of a radius. At the Callahan Dairy Farm, 73-year-old Margaret Callahan repeated what she'd said the night before, just with more weight this time. "I saw a van, blue, faded, kinda beat up, turned onto County Road 47 right around the time the bus dropped her off. It was going slow, real slow." "Could you describe the driver?" Harper asked. Margaret squinted, brow wrinkling. "Too far away. Didn't think much of it at the time. Contractors drive through here all the time." Her regret was palpable. Redwood County didn't have traffic cameras out on its rural roads. The budget barely allowed for a single camera at the town square. Investigators had almost nothing on video. They were working blind. At noon, the BCI tech team accessed Hannah's cell tower records. Her flip phone had limited data, but it told a story. The last signal came at 5:48 p.m., pinging the tower along State Route 41, right where the backpack was found, 5 minutes after she stepped off the bus. Then, silence. Her phone didn't die. It was either destroyed or taken somewhere out of range. Agent Dana Wolf, a seasoned investigator in her mid-40s with a face carved by too many cases like this, studied the timeline. 5 minutes, she said. Whoever took her knew the area. They acted fast. They planned their route. By mid-afternoon, over 200 volunteers had joined the search. Farmers left tractors in fields. Shop owners locked their doors. High school students who barely knew Hannah lined up to comb fields side by side. Local news vans pulled in from Columbus and Dayton. Soon, Hannah's face, bright-eyed and hopeful in her school picture, filled screens across the state. But the most distressing moment came late that afternoon when Megan Wilcox, Hannah's best friend, arrived with her mother. Megan trembled as she sat at the kitchen table across from Agent Wolf. "Hannah told me something a few weeks ago," she whispered. "She said there was this guy." "What guy, sweetheart?" "A man in a work van, old. He would drive by the bus stop sometimes. Not every day, just enough. He made her uncomfortable." "Did she describe him?" "She had no idea." A faded, blue work van. Seen close to the bus stop. Seen by Hannah before. The detail landed like a punch. Agent Wolf immediately ordered a database search of registered commercial vans in Redwood and neighboring counties. There were dozens: plumbers, electricians, handymen, contractors. Too many blue vans for comfort. Sheriff Harper rubbed his eyes, exhausted. We're drowning in vans. By Sunday night, the 48-hour mark, the most crucial window in any abduction case, passed like a blade sliding through hope. Evidence was thin, leads were scattered, and Hannah Cole was still missing. In the barn behind the house, Mark leaned on a pitchfork, unable to move. Inside, Laura sat on Hannah's bed, holding her daughter's clarinet, shaking. Sheriff Harper stood on the courthouse steps in front of news cameras, voice heavy with fatigue.
We are treating the disappearance of 14-year-old Hannah Cole as an abduction. If anyone saw a faded blue work van near County Road 47 between 4:30 and 5 p.m. on Friday, please call our tip line immediately." But as cameras shut off and the crowd dispersed, reality lingered. They still had no suspect, no strong lead, not even a direction. And the trail was cooling fast.
By early November 2007, 3 weeks after Hannah disappeared, the investigation had swelled into a storm of tips, interviews, and false hope. More than 400 leads had been logged. Every single one had collapsed under scrutiny. And the blue work van, the one thread they thought would unravel the whole mystery, had become its own kind of curse. Sheriff Harper's team compiled a list of 77 registered blue commercial vans across Redwood, Briar, and neighboring counties. Deputies interviewed plumbers who kept immaculate logs of their service calls, electricians whose co-workers confirmed they were nowhere near Redwood County that day, contractors with receipts, work orders, and time cards. Every time a lead looked promising, it fell apart. As media coverage spread, sighting reports multiplied uncontrollably. People called in about blue vans, gray vans, white vans, vans with ladders strapped on, vans with dented fenders. Suddenly, everyone remembered a van of some kind, but none of them led anywhere. Agent Wolf brought in a forensic sketch artist who worked with Megan Wilcox to create a composite of the creepy guy Hannah had mentioned. Megan tried, but her memory was vague. The result was a generic middle-aged man with a ball cap and neutral features, someone who could blend into any hardware store in Ohio. When the sketch hit newspapers, the Redwood Gazette and the Columbus Herald printed it big on the front page. It generated dozens of tips, all wrong. Meanwhile, Hannah's backpack revealed nothing helpful. The ditch water had degraded every scrap of potential DNA. The only fingerprints belonged to Hannah and members of her family. Agent Wolf stood over the evidence table one gray morning, the backpack lying open in an evidence tray like a silent accusation. "This placement was intentional," she muttered. "Visible enough to be found, far enough to confuse the trail." Deputy Blake nodded. "Someone local? Someone who knows this county better than we do." Then came the false break. On November 8th, when a hiker along Possum Creek found a girl's denim jacket tangled in the underbrush, nearly the entire investigation mobilized. The jacket was the same size Hannah wore, same wash, same brass buttons. Laura nearly collapsed when shown the photo. But the small label inside, one Hannah didn't have, revealed the truth. It belonged to another girl lost the previous summer during a camping trip. The emotional whiplash was devastating. Hope raised, then crushed in the span of hours. 3 days later, a lead came in from a Briar County gas station that changed everything, at least for a moment. The clerk, a young guy named Evan Pierce, remembered something odd from the night Hannah vanished. At around 5:30 p.m., a man driving a faded blue work van pulled up, bought zip ties, duct tape, a large tarp, and paid cash. "Just felt weird," Evan told investigators. "Who buys that combo on a Friday at sunset?" The gas station's camera footage wasn't helpful. It was 2007 quality, grainy and flickering, but it confirmed the purchase, the timestamp, and the presence of a blue van. The driver kept his head low, face hidden beneath a cap. "Could be him," Sheriff Harper said, eyes sharp with renewed energy. "Could finally be our guy." Investigators enhanced the footage as much as 2007 tech allowed. They identified the van's shape and make, likely a mid-90s Ford Econoline. They pulled registry records. 3 owners matched that vehicle profile in the region. Martin Keeler, 62, retired plumber. James Dorsey, 47, construction foreman. Robert Halston, 53, independent handyman. Harper's team interviewed all 3. Keeler had an airtight alibi. He'd been in Cleveland visiting his daughter, confirmed by toll booth camera logs. Dorsey had been on a construction site surrounded by witnesses since 8 a.m. That left Robert Halston.
Halston lived alone in a rundown rental outside the rural community of Milford, about 20 miles from Redwood County. He barely worked, took odd jobs, kept to himself. Neighbors described him as strange, quiet, occasionally paranoid, the kind of man whose presence unsettled people even before they knew why. When deputies knocked on his door on November 21st, he answered immediately, eyes wide like he'd been expecting company or trouble. He admitted owning a blue van. He denied being anywhere near Redwood County on October 19th. "I was home all day," he said, scratching nervously at his left arm, "fixing my furnace." "Anyone who can confirm that?" Deputy Blake asked. "No, I live alone." Halston hesitated when asked for permission to search his property. His eyes darted, calculating something. Then he reluctantly signed the consent form. Deputies searched for 6 hours. House, garage, van. They found clutter, tools, newspapers stacked to the ceiling, old receipts, broken appliances, a life lived mostly in isolation. But they found nothing that connected him to Hannah. No articles of clothing, no trace evidence, no suspicious receipts, no indication a crime had been committed. His van was worn, but shockingly clean, as if recently vacuumed. Forensic techs collected DNA samples and fibers anyway. 3 weeks later, the results came back. No match. The DNA belonged to Halston himself, and a mix of unknowns likely accumulated from years of passengers or work. The fibers were generic, common in thousands of vehicles. Agent Wolf tossed the report onto her desk, frustration sharpening her voice. "It's too clean. Either he's not our guy or he's unbelievably careful." Without concrete evidence, Halston remained a person of interest, but nothing more. They couldn't arrest him, couldn't search again without better cause. Sheriff Harper delivered the news to Mark and Laura personally. "He just walks free?" Laura whispered, trembling. Harper swallowed, jaw tight. "For now. But we're not giving up." By December, with the first snow falling soft and silent across the fields, the case stalled completely. Media coverage fizzled. National outlets moved on. In Redwood County, people continued whispering Hannah's name in grocery store aisles and church pews. Parents became more watchful. Kids weren't allowed to walk home alone anymore. But slowly, inevitably, the urgency dulled into lingering dread. Christmas Eve came. The Cole family sat in their living room staring at the empty stocking hanging where Hannah's should have been. Ethan looked up at his mother. "Mom," he asked quietly, "is Hannah coming home?" Laura couldn't answer. Mark stepped outside into the cold, watching snow drift across the fields where he used to see his daughter walking towards him at the end of every school day. Now all he saw was the void where she should have been. January 2008 arrived with no breakthroughs, no movement, no hope. The case was officially transferred to the Ohio Attorney General's Cold Case Unit. The file was labeled, logged, stored in a metal filing cabinet in Columbus. Just another unsolved abduction. Another family stuck between hope and despair. But none of them, not the Cole family, not Sheriff Harper, not even Robert Halston, could know that the truth was already waiting in that evidence box. Waiting for a technology that didn't exist yet. Waiting for 16 long years.
The years didn't just pass over Redwood County. They eroded it. Like slow water carving stone, grief reshaped everything in subtle but permanent ways. By 2010, 3 years after Hannah vanished, her case had become a kind of local ghost story. Not spoken of directly, not forgotten, but softened into something people whispered about only when the nights were long or the roads were too dark. The missing posters that once covered every telephone pole had faded to sun-bleached sheets flapping in the wind before they finally tore away. New tragedies replaced the old ones. New faces on the news replaced Hannah's. But for the Cole family, nothing replaced her. Laura aged faster than any mother should. Grief carved deep lines around her eyes and mouth. She kept Hannah's room exactly as it had been the morning she disappeared. Bedspread smoothed, clarinet on the desk,
stuffed animals arranged with careful hands. Once a week she dusted the dresser. Every time she cried. Every year on October 19th, Redwood Community Church held a candlelight vigil. The first year, hundreds attended, then dozens, then a handful. But Laura stood at the front every time, holding a candle that flickered in the autumn wind. Mark threw himself into work at the grain cooperative. The harder he worked, the more numb he felt. He rarely spoke about Hannah. He didn't have to. Everyone knew he carried her absence like a weight in his chest. Their son, Ethan, grew up under a shadow. By the time he left for college in Cleveland, he barely came home. Redwood was too heavy with memories he didn't know how to hold. Sheriff Harper retired in 2012, gray-haired and defeated. At his retirement party in the VFW hall, with lukewarm coffee and sheet cake, he pulled Agent Dana Wolf aside. "He failed her," he said quietly, staring down at the wrinkled tablecloth. Wolf shook her head, but Harper couldn't be convinced. He spent his retirement years occasionally driving past the Cole farmhouse, windows down, as if proximity alone might undo a decade of regret. The case, now labeled 2008-CCU14, sat in a metal filing cabinet in Columbus, reviewed yearly by protocol, then slid back into darkness. No new witnesses, no new leads, no new technology to crack the evidence. Robert Halston, the strange handyman from Milford, became more reclusive with each passing year. Neighbors saw less of him. By 2009, he had sold the blue van and bought a rust-red pickup instead. Investigators occasionally cruised past his property, noting that the truck was still there, that he still lived alone, that he still avoided everyone. But they could do nothing more. Without evidence, suspicion was just air. Over time, theories sprouted like weeds. Some said Hannah had been taken by a drifter passing through on Route 41. Some believed a local predator still hid among them. Others whispered that the gas station footage, the man buying zip ties, duct tape, and a tarp, had to be the key. But the footage remained too grainy, too distorted. Nothing moved. Not until 2018, when a true crime podcast featured Hannah's case. It was well-researched, but offered no new insights, just brought old wounds to the surface. Laura listened once, sitting in her car behind the library where she worked, sobbing silently through the entire 40 minutes. The podcast stirred up a small flurry of tips, none useful, some bizarre. And then the world changed. 2020, the science arrives. Not because of Hannah's case specifically, but because forensic science took a quantum leap. Genetic genealogy, using public DNA databases to trace relatives of unknown suspects, was solving cold cases once thought impossible. Cases older than Hannah's, cases with far less evidence. The Ohio Attorney General's office launched a statewide initiative, re-examine cold cases using these new methods. One of the analysts was a young forensic genealogist named Dr. Maya Tran, sharp, methodical, and compassionate in a way most people in her field forgot how to be. When she opened the Hannah Cole case file in late 2020, she read every word, every report, every transcript, every log. And she noticed something. In 2007, forensic techs had collected fiber samples from Halston's van. They had been dismissed as too degraded, too mixed with contamination, too useless with the technology of the time. But the fibers had been stored properly. They'd never been exposed to heat or moisture. More importantly, inside those fibers were epithelial cells, tiny skin cells embedded deep in the van's carpeting from whoever had been inside it. Back then, the sample was inconclusive. In 2020, with next-generation sequencing, it might be enough. Dr. Tran filed a request for advanced DNA extraction. The samples arrived at the State Forensic Lab in January 2021. The work began. Processing them took months. The DNA was degraded, old, and mixed, but new sequencing techniques could amplify thousands of genetic markers from fragments once considered useless. It was painstaking work, but by June 2021, Dr. Tran had a partial but viable genetic profile. Not Hannah's, not Mark's, not Laura's. An unknown male. Dr. Tran uploaded the sample into GEDmatch, the public database used for ancestry research. She didn't expect a direct hit. That almost never happened. What she hoped for was a relative. 3 weeks later, her computer chimed. A match. A third cousin. Approximately 3.7% shared DNA. Enough to build a tree. Dr. Tran began tracing the match's family history, marriage records, birth certificates, census logs, every branch, every sibling, every cousin. It took 3 months, but by August 2021, she had narrowed the tree to a cluster of relatives living in Redwood, Briar, and Milford counties. One name sat in the center of the genetic map like a spider at the heart of a web. Robert James Halston, age 67, Milford, Ohio. Dr. Tran's breath caught in her throat. She read the name again. The same man flagged in 2007. The same man investigators had always suspected but could never touch. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone. 16 years after Hannah Cole vanished, the case that had haunted Redwood County was about to light up like a flare in the dark. The breakthrough didn't come with fanfare. It arrived in the cold, fluorescent-lit quiet of a forensic lab in Columbus, where Dr. Maya Tran stared at a sprawling digital family tree on her monitor. Months of tracing distant cousins, dead relatives, and tangled lineage had led to one undeniable conclusion. The degraded DNA, extracted from fibers inside a van in 2007, belonged to someone in the direct family line of Robert James Halston. And Halston had no children, no living parents, no siblings left alive except a sister estranged for 20 years. No one else whose DNA could match so closely. Dr. Tran exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of it. "This is him," she whispered. "It's always been him." She sent her official report to the Ohio Cold Case Unit. Lieutenant Paul Henders, graying at the temples, worn by too many unresolved files, received the report on September 2, 2021. He read the document twice, then a third time. His hands trembled. He'd been a junior investigator when Hannah disappeared. He remembered Laura Cole's face, Mark's shaking hands, Sheriff Harper's exhaustion. He picked up the phone. Within days, a multi-agency task force formed, state investigators, forensic experts, and the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team. They knew they had one real shot. 16 years had passed. Evidence was old, memories were faint, but science, finally, had a voice strong enough to shout over the silence. Agent Dana Wolf, now in her early 60s but still sharp and relentless, returned as a consultant. Standing in the briefing room, looking at updated photos of Halston, she felt her stomach twist. He looked older, gaunt, gray-bearded, hollow-eyed. But that only made him more dangerous in her mind. A man who had waited years, paranoid, isolated, thinking he'd outlived justice. "He's been looking over his shoulder for a decade and a half," Wolf said quietly. "He knows, or at least, he feels it coming." Henders nodded. "Which means we do this clean. We do it right. No mistakes." A surveillance team positioned 2 unmarked vehicles along the edge of Milford, across from Halston's rental house. His rust-red pickup sat in the gravel drive, tires soft, the hood speckled with rust. Halston rarely left, sometimes not for days. When he did, he shuffled outside in old sweatpants, collected his mail, muttered to himself, and disappeared back inside. Neighbors said he talked to things that weren't there. "We need fresh DNA," Agent Wolf reminded the team. "Not just genealogical matches, direct forensic evidence." Under Ohio law, they could legally retrieve trash left at the curb without a warrant. So they waited. On October 3, 2021, at 6:12 a.m., Halston dragged 2 trash bags to the end of his driveway, looking over both shoulders like someone might be watching. Then he turned and walked back inside. Minutes later, investigators retrieved the bags. Inside they found a disposable razor, 2 coffee cups, several cigarette butts. "Perfect," the tech said, sealing them in evidence containers. The items went straight to the lab. Meanwhile, the task force revisited everyone connected to the original investigation. At a retirement home, 89-year-old Margaret Callahan struggled to remember details clearly, but one thing she remained firm on: she saw a faded blue van driving slowly that day, the same kind of van Halston used to own. In Florida, the former Broward County gas station clerk Evan Pierce, now in his early 30s, agreed to watch the old footage again during a video call. "That's the transaction," he said, leaning toward the screen. "That's the guy with the tarp and duct tape. I remember because something felt wrong about him." Agent Wolf showed him a 2007 photo of Halston. Evan squinted. "Can't be certain, but yeah, the build, the way he moves, it could be him." The team moved on to the only dataset that had never been fully utilized: the cell phone records. In 2007, they'd only had basic tower hits. But now the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team could reconstruct movement. Specialist David Park analyzed the logs. Hannah's phone pinged the Route 41 tower at 5:58 p.m., he said. "That part isn't new. But what is new, what we can see now, is that the phone was moving at about 45 miles per hour when it disconnected." "Inside a vehicle," Wolf said. Park nodded. "And Halston's phone, his old flip phone from 2007, we recovered archived tower data from his carrier. His phone followed the same tower sequence at the same times." He clicked a remote. On the screen, 2 dots moved almost identically across a map of Redwood County. One was Hannah's phone, the other was Halston. "They were both traveling together," Park said. "Based on tower triangulation, almost certainly the same vehicle." The room went silent. For the first time, Henders felt certainty settle into place like a puzzle piece fitting perfectly. "This is enough to move," he said. "If the DNA aligns, we move on him. Immediately." The DNA results. They arrived 2 weeks later. Lieutenant Henders read the report 3 times, breath quickening. The DNA from the razor matched the van fibers with 99.97% certainty, statistically irrefutable. Another lab report identified microscopic textile fibers preserved in evidence from 2007. With modern spectroscopy, analysts confirmed they matched the weave and dye of Hannah Cole's denim jacket. Agent Wolf's voice trembled as she read the report. Her fist clenched around it. "It's over. We finally got him." Prosecutor Karen Ellison, who had grown up in Broward County and still remembered the day Hannah went missing, reviewed the compiled evidence for 3 days. She barely slept. Genealogical DNA, direct DNA, fiber analysis, cell tower synchronization, the gas station purchase, the van sighting. No body, no confession. But the web was airtight. On November 15, 2021, she signed the arrest warrant. At 8 a.m. the next morning, Lieutenant Henders sat at his desk holding his phone. He took a long breath, then dialed the Cole family's number. Laura answered. "Mrs. Cole," Henders said gently, "I need you to sit down." I heard her chair scrape across the floor. "Who?" she whispered. "We've identified a suspect in Hannah's case, An arrest warrant is being executed this morning. Silence, then a trembling breath. Who? Robert James Halston, he said. A handyman we interviewed back in 2007. Laura made a sound between a sob and a gasp. Mark took the phone. Are you sure? He asked, voice thick. The evidence is strong, and, we believe, we finally have the right man. The next morning, before dawn, the task force rolled into Milford. 16 years after Hannah Cole vanished, justice was finally knocking on Robert Halston's door. The arrest happened in the cold blue quiet of early morning, November 17, 2021, just after 6 a.m. Frost clung to the scrub grass around Robert Halston's run-down Milford rental. The world was still. The only movement came from the slow approach of unmarked vehicles rolling to a stop on the gravel shoulder. A SWAT team positioned around the property with precision, half watching the front windows, half covering the back door, shields angled, rifles low. A loudspeaker crackled. Robert James Halston, this is the Ohio State Police. Come out with your hands where we can see them. Inside, Halston had been awake. Investigators would later learn he often stayed up all night, pacing, muttering to himself. Some nights he sat in pitch darkness until sunrise. Some nights he talked to people who weren't there. But this morning, as he sat in his threadbare living room, he didn't look startled by the command outside. He looked resigned, as if he had known this day would come, as if he had been waiting for the knock. After a moment, the front door creaked open. A thin man stepped into the cold, wearing a stained t-shirt and sweatpants, his gray beard unkempt, eyes hollow. He lifted his hands, palms forward. He didn't protest, he didn't shout, he didn't ask why. He just walked toward the officers, slow and tired, and let them cuff him. Agent Dana Wolf watched from behind an armored vehicle, jaw clenched, eyes burning. 16 years, she whispered. 16 years he walked around free. They transported Halston to the Redwood County Jail, where he sat expressionless as officers processed him. When the charges were read, kidnapping and aggravated murder, he simply nodded once, like he'd been expecting the list. His public defender, Marcus Webb, a young attorney with more compassion than experience, knew immediately he was stepping into the most complex case of his career. By noon, every news station in Ohio had broken the story. Arrest made in 2007 Redwood County child abduction. Forensic genealogy leads to breakthrough. Hannah's school photo, smiling, innocent, appeared again on screens everywhere. At the Cole farmhouse, reporters lined the road, cameras aimed like satellites. Inside, Laura Cole sat at the kitchen table, trembling, her hands pressed to her mouth. Mark stood beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder. "He's in custody," he whispered. "It's finally happening." Laura nodded, tears running freely. It wasn't closure, but it was something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 16 years. It was certainty. The trial begins, March 7, 2022. The Redwood County Courthouse, a brick relic from the late 1800s, had never seen anything like this. The courtroom filled with journalists, locals, and families who still remembered the day Hannah disappeared. Outside, a small memorial had formed on the lawn, candles, handwritten notes, and a banner stretched between two oak trees. Justice for Hannah Cole. Inside, the trial began. Prosecutor Karen Ellison, now 39, had followed Hannah's case since she was a teenager in Bryan County. Today, she walked to the jury with her shoulders squared and her jaw set. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about science catching up to a man who thought he outran justice." She laid out the roadmap. Genealogical DNA pointing directly to Halston's family line. The fresh DNA match from the razor. Cell tower data placing him with Hannah in the same vehicle. The fiber match from her jacket. the purchase of zip ties, duct tape, and a tarp. Witness sightings of his faded blue van near the bus stop. "This isn't coincidence," Ellison said. "It's a pattern that leads to one man." When it was the defense's turn, Marcus Webb faced the jury with a calm but strained expression. "The prosecution asks you to convict based on circumstance and probability. There is no eyewitness, no confession, no body. The law requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt." It was the only argument he had, and he knew it wasn't enough. The first week focused on DNA. Dr. Maya Tran took the stand, projecting calm authority. She explained genealogical triangulation with diagrams, color-coded branches stretching back generations. "This DNA profile matches the defendant's family line with overwhelming certainty." Webb challenged her. "How can you be sure there isn't an unknown cousin, a missing branch, a hidden child?" Tran didn't flinch. "We cross-referenced every record available, birth certificates, census logs, public DNA databases. There is no missing branch. The probability that this DNA belongs to anyone but Robert Halston is less than 1 in 10 million. The jury listened closely. Even the skeptical ones began to soften. The second week brought cell tower reconstruction. FBI analyst David Park displayed a digital map showing dots moving across Redwood County. These two phones traveled the same route at the same time. One was Hannah's, the other belonged to the defendant. Webb objected again and again. Tower upgrades, incomplete logs, time degradation, but each objection fell flat. The jury saw the lines overlap. Both phones, same direction, same minute. Same story. Week 3 belonged to the Cole family. Laura took the stand, older now, grief etched into every line of her face. She spoke about Hannah's last morning, breakfast, a hug, a simple, "Love you, Mom," as Hannah headed out the door. Those were the last words she ever heard from her daughter. When Laura looked directly at Halston, the room held its breath. "You let us search for her for 16 years. You watched us beg for answers, and you gave us nothing." Halston stared at the table. No reaction, no apology, nothing. Days later, Margaret Callahan, now 90, was wheeled into the courtroom. "I saw that blue van, driving slow, too slow, like the driver was looking for something." Webb handled her cross-examination with care, but her certainty held on. "I remember what I remember," she said simply. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 11 hours. In a back conference room, Laura held Mark's hand. Ethan Cole, now a grown man, leaned forward, head in his hands. Agent Dana Wolf sat in the hallway. She had no official role now, but couldn't bring herself to leave. On March 29, 2022, at 3:47 p.m., the jury filed back into the courtroom. The foreman stood. "On the charge of kidnapping, guilty." Laura gasped, sobbing as Mark wrapped his arms around her. "On the charge of aggravated murder, guilty." The word echoed through the room. Guilty. 16 years after a walk home from a school bus ended in silence, the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Halston showed no emotion. He simply stared forward, lips moving faintly, muttering something no one could hear. 2 weeks later, Judge Patricia Holbrook issued the sentence. Life without parole, consecutive terms. "The law shows no mercy for what you did, and neither will this court." Halston was led away in chains as someone in the gallery cried out, "Where is she? Where's Hannah?" He never turned. He never answered. He never would.
When the guilty verdict rolled through the courtroom, it moved like a shockwave, through the families, through the investigators, through the heart of Redwood County itself. 16 years of questions had just been answered in a single word. But the word didn't heal everything. There was still one truth that hovered like a shadow over all of it. No one knew where Hannah was, and even victory could feel hollow when a place setting remained empty at the dinner table, when a bedroom silence felt too heavy, when a daughter's voice was still only a memory. Still, the trial changed something in Redwood County, something subtle but real. For the first time in 16 years, the air felt less heavy. The fields, the church steps, the grocery aisles, they all felt like places where people could finally breathe again. The day the verdict was announced, people gathered outside the Redwood County courthouse in a way they hadn't since the early years of the investigation. Some came with candles, some came with flowers. Some just stood silently, hands in pockets, as if unsure what to feel after carrying this case for so long. Prosecutor Karen Ellison stepped up to the microphones with the Cole family beside her. "Today," she said, voice steady, "science and persistence brought justice for Hannah Cole. This case proves that cold does not mean forgotten, and it proves that families deserve answers no matter how many years pass." Laura stepped forward holding a small sheet of paper. It shook in her fingers. Hannah was 14. She loved animals, music. She loved this town. She deserved a full life, a beautiful life. And while nothing will take away the pain of losing her, we are grateful. Grateful that someone finally listened to the clues she left behind. She paused, breath hitching. "Mark and I are establishing a scholarship in her name, one for students pursuing forensic science. If Hannah's story can help bring answers to another family, then her memory lives on." People wiped their eyes, even reporters choked up. For the first time in 16 years, the Cole family spoke of Hannah in a way that didn't cling to desperation or grief. Instead, they spoke of legacy. That night, Redwood County gathered at the bus stop where the road still curved gently between two fields, the last place anyone had seen Hannah alive. Someone planted a young maple tree there earlier that morning. Its thin trunk trembled in the wind. At the base, a bronze plaque read, "Hannah Cole, 1993 to 2007. Forever remembered." Hundreds of people came, farmers, teachers now grown, neighbors who had searched fields with flashlights 16 years earlier. They lit candles one by one, the flickering glow reflected in the glossy surface of the plaque. Laura stood with Mark and Ethan, arms linked, heads bowed. The wind whispered through the fields. Some said it sounded like a voice. Some said it sounded like closure. But for Laura, it felt like Hannah was finally someplace reachable, someplace warm, someplace she could finally talk to. A few days after sentencing, Laura did something she hadn't been able to do in 16 years. She opened Hannah's bedroom door with the intention not to preserve it, but to begin. The air inside still carried faint traces of her daughter's perfume. A poster of a boy band hung slightly crooked on the wall. The clarinet lay untouched on her desk. Laura walked to the window and pulled the curtains fully open. Sunlight poured across the room like a blessing. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry, not out of loss this time, but out of release. A weight she had carried for more than a decade finally loosened its hold. Mark found her there sometime later, holding Hannah's stuffed elephant in her lap. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her, their shoulders touching. For years, grief had kept them in separate orbits. Now, for the first time, they sat together in the same gravity again. The case became a landmark in forensic genealogy, studied in universities, discussed in conferences. Dr. Maya Tran published papers on how degraded DNA could be reconstructed through next-generation sequencing. Her research opened the door for dozens of other cold cases across Ohio. Agent Dana Wolf retired soon afterward. The Cole case finally filed under the category she had once thought impossible: solved. Lieutenant Paul Henderson attended the sentencing, then quietly closed the case file on his computer, the cursor hovering for only a moment before he clicked Transfer to, Solved, Cases, Archive. For him, it felt like the slow unwinding of a knot he had carried for half his career. Schools in Redwood County added new safety programs, teaching students to trust their instincts, to report unusual behavior, to never assume danger only lives in cities. Hannah's story became part of local curriculum, taught not to terrify, but to empower. And in a way no one anticipated, she became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of justice, perseverance, and the quiet strength of small communities that refuse to forget their own. Every October 19th, candles lit the intersection of County Road 47 and Briarwood Drive. Even people who had moved away returned just to stand there, holding a light against the cold air. On warm evenings, when the sky turned orange over the fields, Laura would sit on the porch with a cup of tea. She'd talk to Hannah, not in the desperate, pleading way she had for so many years, but gently, like a mother updating her daughter on life, on Ethan's new job, on the scholarship recipients, on the first birds of spring. And sometimes, she couldn't prove it, couldn't explain it, she felt something in the breeze, a shift, a softness, like Hannah was listening. Mark felt it too in his way. When he worked the fields at dusk, when he checked the grain bins, he felt like someone was walking beside him, a presence familiar and comforting. It didn't erase the loss, it didn't erase the pain, but it let life move again. It let time move again. The disappearance of Hannah Cole had once seemed like an unbreakable silence, a riddle swallowed by cornfields and time, a shadow stretching across 16 years. But the truth didn't stay buried. Science advanced, people refused to forget, and justice, slow, patient, relentless, finally caught up. 16 years was too long, but it wasn't forever. And in the end, truth emerged, steady as sunrise, inevitable as dawn.